so this was on the economic side. And then, of course, if you add to that the complete deprivation of civil and political rights, any form of participation in governance and so on, I mean, the accumulation of both, I think, are a recipe for exactly what's happening, is people rising to take back their fundamental political rights and economic rights. Elsewhere, what I may think is an unfair or unjust or inequitable distribution of wealth is governed by democratic processes. Right? If you're not happy with it, elect another government. And that's why it doesn't lead to armed conflict. I think we have to be very careful in not the organization I currently, I was going to say lead, but I won't use this word here, that I preside, is our mission is the prevention of armed conflict, the prevention of, and now we're talking more and more, the prevention of deadly conflict. We can't talk about the prevention of conflict. In fact, conflict is very often a positive factor, and so it's the management of conflict and the degeneration into armed conflict. And I think so, economic inequities are, as long as they are handled through democratic political processes, you get what you get.
You mentioned elections and political processes, and we're here in a room full of community-minded individuals, I expect. Would there be a message that you would give us to take out to our politicians to influence Canada's role and participation in the human rights issues internationally?
Well, I'm not sure they're going to be in much of a listening mode. They just got elected, so if I were you, I'd go on a canoe trip for the next couple of years. No, but right? Now, I don't want to be so flippant and facetious, but it is surprising. Certainly in the international work I've done, you normally see a reflection of domestic policies very much in international relations policies. That's why, for instance, the Scandinavians, who have very strong social security systems at home, have very generous international aid programs. It's the reverse side of the same coin. It's part of a belief in collective welfare, in sharing, and all these values are reflected that. In my assessment, there is currently a disconnect, I think, between what I continue to think Canadians think, for instance, of their commitment to a healthcare system and so on, and foreign policies, which are, first of all, not easily discernible, assuming there are some, and don't seem to carry. I think Canadians still have an image of themselves that is fading on the international scene, and what I know of Canada, I don't see reflected internationally, which I think is it's a particular loss, because there are not a lot of countries like Canada. The Europeans now are starting again. They're on a bandwagon of very anti-immigration. You know, their response to what's happening in North Africa is to try to lock the door, right, so nobody can come in. It's both a populist movement, and then inside the European Union, it's a very big political issue. Multiculturalism, pluralism is getting a bad name. There are lots of countries, including the UK, revisiting that. You know, integration is the way to go, not any kind of. You hear a discourse, and it's to me it's particularly unhelpful that there's no voice coming out of Canada, which has, in my opinion, quite a bit to say on these kinds of issues that would be actually pretty helpful. So, yeah, I think it would be good to relaunch a kind of... Canada has, I think, has earned over time a reputation as a great convener, of course. You know, people want to know what the Canadians think, because they're not out at least historically, on the fringe, and you know, they're there in a kind of a very core, solid center where you could convene others and where a lot of accommodations can be made to develop a common good. It's not the best, but it's really good enough, and I don't see a lot of that happening. Yes.
Hi. You mentioned managing conflict, and I was wondering, sort of more on a Canadian level, if you could talk a little bit about the use of restorative justice practices and how we as leaders in our community can sort of promote that more.
I think it's important that we make, I don't know much about Canadian initiatives, I have to say, on these models, but I think we are developing more and more globally a sense that justice can take many forms, that we cannot just embrace a kind of retribution, kind of punishment model, particularly in criminal justice. Someone remarked to me recently, although these are not facts I've checked myself, but it seems to be widely accepted, that the state of California, for instance, currently spends more money on corrections than on education. And then if you ask yourself why that is, it's all traceable to a series of extremely misguided criminal law policies, you know, 3 strikes and you're out, and removing all discretions of judges in sentencing, so inflating the prison population, which then creates a correctional industrial complex with a lot of privatization. And it's not a very good position to find yourself in, when in fact I think what we need to do is approach justice issues in a much, much more comprehensive fashion, including, but I don't know enough about the initiatives that are being put in place here. And I think we need to revisit, there's not a lot of appetite for that, unfortunately, but you know, the interplay between the criminal justice system and the mental health system has never been. I mean, there's an inquest going on here, which I hope will give some visibility again to this, unacceptable situation of mishandling lives through very inadequate policies and investment. Yes?
Can you speak to us a little bit about citizenship and what that means to you and what that can mean to us as potential leaders?
Well, I don't know if you mean it, you don't mean it in a technical sense. No. You mean it in a kind of generic, you don't mean citizens as opposed to non-citizens, or aliens, as I'm called when I go to the US. Very strange. I was at a meeting in the White House just about 2 weeks ago, and for some reason, the way it had been scheduled, the room was not available, so I was invited to attend this meeting. It's a very small meeting. There were 3 of us on our side and 3 or 4 of them on the other side in a very small situation room. And I was told that this was unprecedented for an alien to be present in a conversation. I thought I had turned green. But fortunately, I was not an undesirable alien. So I think you mean citizenship in the sense of a civil society actor. Well, I think it's critical. The organization with which I now work, International Crisis Group, in a sense, is at the cutting edge of civil society occupying the last field that historically has been the preserve of state actors, which is the field of international peace and security. And for civil society actors to work, whether it's on a very small scale domestically on any issue, or on a bigger scale internationally, you need a combination of actors and philanthropists. Civil society has its own fuel. That's why it's so potent in America, because of the long history of philanthropy. Now, philanthropy, starting in America and spreading a little bit in Canada and in Europe, has historically been welcomed by government because it alleviates the responsibility of governments in fields where they don't care anyway, like health and education. I don't mean to say don't care, but they're quite happy to unload the service delivery in the private sector. So you see, you know, the Gates Foundation, all the big foundations, very engaged in education, health, the arts, sports, And only in about the last 20 years, you've seen philanthropy aligning itself with the human rights movement, with Human Rights Watch, for instance, some big human rights organizations mobilizing people's money and people's willingness to do the work to do that. What we do is still, there's nobody there. Because it's international peace and security is the stuff that is done in the Security Council of the United Nations. So it's political analysis of deadly conflict. So it's a level of citizens' engagement. It's like the early days in this country of public interest advocacy. You know, people who took the government to court to advance consumer protection rights, gender equality, this kind of mobilization of citizens. Internationally, as I said, it has for a long time been kind of stuck in the service delivery humanitarian sector. And only now is it opening up, I think, to the voices of global citizens to take on issues that are too important to be left to horse trading between governments' interests. So it's the same model, but broadened.
I'm afraid we've run out of time.
Oh, yes.
I wanted to thank you very much for
It's
taking
a
the time
pleasure.
to come and talk to us. It was very, very interesting to hear what you had to say and very inspiring as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.